All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Josephina. I'm the market visual lead based out of Boston, so I cover the New England market. So welcome to today's mapping session. We are going to spend about 90 minutes together, and we are going to go through all sorts of mapping, which I'm really excited to take you guys through. I will be sharing my screen in a couple of seconds, but before I go ahead and do that, I just want to sort of put it out there. I do want it to be a lot of participation on the call. Any questions you may have, any sort of questions in general in terms of mapping, the tools and the resources, just call them out. You can stop me at any time if you feel like we need to elaborate on anything that I'm covering. That would be great. You can also use the chat function to call out your questions with thumbs up if you're liking something, or clap your hands so we can keep it exciting and fun. But we are going to kick off with sharing my deck. Okay. So, all right, like I had said, we are going to spend roughly about 90 minutes is the session. And what we're going to sort of cover today, it's the training material is sort of broken down to 3 sections. So first, it's mapping tools and resources. So we will take a deep dive into all of the tools and the resources that we have available for you to help you with the mapping of your store. Then we're going to go into actually mapping the floor set. So we're going to walk through step by step on how to approach mapping and what all of that entails. And then we're going to go into a mapping in action. So we are going to practice a little bit together. We're going to look at some options on how a store maps, and we can look at some of the opportunities and then identify those, and then how do we course correct. And then lastly but not least, my favorite page of this presentation is showing you all the awesome features that we have in our digital mapped app that you are using for mapping your stores. But to sort of kick us off, to get us all grounded in our objectives and why we are here, so really, and the importance of the mapping, of course. So understand importance of mapping, how it affects the guest journey and help drive the business. That's one of our objectives. So really here ensuring that the importance of mapping and really how and why we are mapping to protect the guest, navigate throughout the store, and finding our key items. We're going to gain a deeper understanding of mapping factors and considerations. So like I had mentioned, the first section of our training today is all about getting grounded and learning the tools and the resources, what they are, and where to find them. And then lastly, establish best practices around mapping the floor set. So this is where we can have a lot of participation towards the end when we're going through the mapping in action. And if there are any of you that sort of already gotten yourself familiar with the mapping process and maybe have some best practice to share already that you know of, that would be great. So then let's go into what is truly mapping. So truly mapping is a process that translates the floor set direction to your specific store's architecture and layout while protecting the brand vision. It also ensures we protect the big ideas in a best at categories. So really making sure that we have landed and mapped our big ideas and our best at categories, which are leggings and bralettes, in the right places in our stores in order to protect the brand. We also talked about protect the guest experience through clear navigation. So really, as she's entering into our store, how is she sort of finding everything, and how is she walking through, and how is her experience walking through our store from the front to the back? And then, of course, eliminate any double work. So having a really strong mapping process also ensures that we have a really strong foundation. So I want to just pause here for a couple of minutes and talk about a couple of things in terms of the slide here. If you're looking at the slide, you'll see two photos. So I wanted to explain to everyone that if you're newer, you may not know all this information, but what we have in our home office, we have a lab store. So we have a home office visual team that works through our floor set in our lab store in our home office. So they place everything, they work through what all of these key ideas and the seasonal message and seasonal strategy is. And then we photograph everything, and then it goes to production, and we produce floor set documents that we then send out to all of you of all of the stores. So every store has a floor set document depending on what store format you are and design. So whether you are a market design or a classic design or a modern design. And then from there, if you're an A3 versus an A3 small. So those are just a couple things to keep in mind as we go through the session, because as I had just mentioned, there's quite a few different floor set documents, and also depending on design and format. And then you also layer in offline. So basically, again, why it's so important to map and why it's so important to have a really strong process is that what we are giving you is what the lab store works. So we have identified one store and one layout that we are now asking, hundreds of stores to execute, but each store is very unique. So there probably is not one store that looks identical to another store. So therefore, you have to take all of these tools and resources and considerations and learn all of them and then say, how do I make this all translate into my space? So that's basically, I just want to pause there and explain that. So that's what you see on this slide. So the first photo here on the left is the lab store. So if you heard me reference the lab store, it's just easier to label it that way because we build it out in a lab store and then we send it out to all of you to make this all work into your space. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see a photo of a real store. So the lab store on the left, the real store on the right. So how do you work the lab store's laydown fit into your space? So that's basically what we're going to learn today. So the first part of our session today is all about getting grounded in the mapping tools and resources. So we have many tools, and we have multiple sort of communication platforms and educational platforms that you can learn from and pull resources and tools from. So we have identified 8 tools that are most important and most critical to sort of get behind and get grounded in that will help you as learning mapping for AIRI and American Eagle. So I'm just going to sort of go through each one of them really quickly and sort of make a nod to where they all live so you can make some notes. But then next step is we're going to take a deeper dive into each and talk about how you can utilize them all. So the first one is the floor set document, and I sort of already talked about what our floor set documents are. Like I said earlier, or just a few minutes ago, we have a floor set document for each store design, and we also have iterations of the different formats, whether you are an A3 or an A3 small. So those documents you can find in Zipline under our visual library. Then we have field visual floor set calls. So what that is, we have an MTL floor set call the week before we are executing the floor set with all MTLs in the brand. So we get together on a 1-hour call with field visual business partners and home office business partners, and we'll talk about the floor set. And we'll go through all of the big ideas, what's new, and we're also covering mapping on this call. So very important call. It's usually on a Tuesday from 2 to 3, So be on the lookout for that. Then we have a new product list. We also refer this list to an NPL, and that is a list of all of the new product that's coming down for a new floor set. So about 3 to 4 weeks before we execute a new floor set, you will get this list sent down in Zipline, and it will outline by category all of the new items that will be arriving for the upcoming floor set. So this tool is the best practice, super important for the stock team to be well versed in and check it off as products are arriving into stores. We have the merchandise category report, and as you sat through Lakeisha's session yesterday, you learned all about reporting and how to utilize these reports and how to analyze them. That's an important tool for an MTL and to really truly understand where the business is coming from and how we're looking at our different categories in terms of volume and then comps as well. Top style report, same thing. It really, again, just to level set here, it's a list of our top 20 selling items of the store, and we really typically hone in on the top 5 to top 10. So those are really important to always make sure that we get behind and we're ensuring that they're replenished, and more importantly, making sure that we have really kept these styles in mind during the mapping process. The STAR report lives under reporting in the hub, along with the merchandise and the top STAR reports. And the STAR report is an attribute report, and we'll get into a little bit more details in a few minutes how to utilize this report. But it has all of your store's information, the square footage, the selling square footage, how many bays you have, the address, etc. And then we have a mapping data worksheet, which is a 2-pager sheet, which basically summarizes all of your fixtures of how many fixtures and wall bays the lab store have, what the model quantity is, and then you can go in and log your quantity and see if you have extra wall bays or less wall bays, or if you have an extra table, or if you have less of a table. And then lastly but not least, we have our amazing Mapped app. So that is, again, the tool that we use for mapping out our floor set. So sort of our last step, once you've gathered all these tools, read through them all, got really grounded in all of these resources, and know where to pull everything from, you're now ready to sit down and map. Okay, so before I go further, I just want to pause for a moment. If anyone have any questions or anything we should talk about before we go into factors and considerations. And if chat function is easier for any of you, you can use that as well. Okay, so we will continue. So mapping factors and considerations. So these are just things that we want to make sure that we keep in mind, top of mind when we're sitting down to map. Because like I said, there's not one store looks the same as another store. So not one size fits all. So again, these are some really important factors and considerations to keep in mind while you sit down and map. So we have the brand seasonal strategy. So we'll go through that in a second, what that truly means, but it's the kickoff document that we have and the floor set document, business and inventory. So again, your reporting, architecture. So what does truly your space look like? Adjacency, so looking at color and how we balance our fixtures on the sales floor, if we have to expand wall base, or if we have to contract based on how many wall base you own in the store. And then balance and symmetry, and that really goes hand in hand with adjacencies as you guys are mapping out wall base, depending on how many wall base you have in store. So these are just sort of some high level factors and considerations to keep in mind. So if you think about these 5 things, you get those covered while you map. I think you've covered everything sort of that you need to keep in mind while you map. So brand and seasonal strategy, if we kick off with that. So I'm going to sort of flash these 3 documents here, because these are the 3 documents that you sort of want to have next to you as you're sitting down with your mapped app, and really making sure you have all the information you need to have in order to be able to map out your floor set. So we have the kickoff, and I'm sure all of you have gotten familiar with the kickoff document, but it is a really comprehensive resource for us that posts 2 weeks before we go ahead and execute our floor set. And he has sort of like a high-level introduction to our floor set. So it walks through the seasonal strategy, anything that's new. It will have a fixture overview, thumbnails, and it will also have overview pages, photos of each room of the store, so you'll get to see how the floor set will look like for the next upcoming floor set. Then the next document you'll see here is the floor set document, basically. So I had said a couple of times already, we have quite a few different documents. So again, making sure that we are pulling the right document based on store design as well as format. But what's great about that we have multiple documents is that you can leverage different documents for inspiration if you needed to. And then this last page here is a really important page in the floor set document that shows the thumbnail overview, and it shows the sort of laydown of all of the fixtures where they're placed in the store, as well as all the wall base. So as we had talked about a little bit earlier, that this is basically the lab store, and then now you're looking at this and saying, okay, how do I translate that into my space? Business and inventory. So we have quite a few tools here. And again, it's sort of just a repetition of what we kicked off with, but it's the merchandise category report, top style report, and here is the new product list that I talked about earlier that has an outline of all of the new items that are arriving for new floor set. And then this is the floor set update pages, and those are in our floor set document, as well as when there is a bigger floor set, maybe with a lot of late items, a lot of moving parts, we sometimes have a special edition with multiple pages with information of things to keep in mind, because as you know, sort of the nature of our business and the place we are in today, a lot of things are late, not only in clothing retail, but just basically everywhere. Things are trickling in sometimes a little bit slower and later than what we're used to, maybe a year or two ago. So it's really important that this page, or I should say pages, that we're keeping these things in mind, because there are things that are trickling in even 2 to 3 weeks late to our initial floor set date. So important to keep these things in mind. But basically, how do we use all these documents together and why? Well, it's really important to understand what your guest is really responding to. So if you are building out a presentation and you don't own all the colors or depth in that presentation and you need to make an adjustment, what would be the right adjustment? So that's sort of how you leverage your reporting to really understand what your guest is responding and gravitate towards. You know, is she shopping Real Me leggings over OG leggings? Then you probably would want to sub with Real Me leggings versus OG leggings because they're further down the list, those types of things. And then, again, knowing your inventory. have I received everything from the NPL list? So really checking off this list throughout the leading up to the floor set is so important, because by the time you get around to sit down and map and about to start and build, you can then go back to this list and say, well, I have 3 or 4 programs, or maybe it's 2 out of 6 colors I haven't received yet. So now I have to plan for that when I'm mapping my floor set. And then the other thing is too, that I may want to make a nod to, we do use a lot of carryover styles to make adjustments. So if there are any items from the past floor set that's carrying over to the new floor set, you could also leverage those items as placeholders. I'll pause here too again, because I know it's a lot of information and I just want to kind of check in sort of what you're thinking and what questions you have. No one has anything? You guys are good? Okay. Thank you, Courtney. All right, so let's see, my screen froze. There we go. So the next thing is architecture. So when we refer to architecture, it's basically just how your store looks like. So it's the layout of your specific store, and it goes back to everything I already covered. Looking at, if you break it down, wall-based versus floor space, if you will, might be easier to remember. So if you're looking, if you're imagining, or if you're thinking about your store that you're working in today, and you think about all of the wall-based laid out in room 1, 2, and 3, how different is that space from the lab store? So again, the fixture thumbnail overview page, which I call the lab store, it's easier to remember that way. How different is it from that? And what are some of the adjustments and modifications you need to do to make sure everything fits properly? And the same thing goes for your tables on your actual sales floor. So some common scenario is that room 1 or room 2 might be a little bit more narrow than the lab store, or we have quite a few stores that have a very wide room 1. So you can actually fit an additional fixture that you can actually see on this slide. So on the right-hand photo here, you can actually see that we fit a 4th fixture versus the lab store have 3 fixtures. So meaning it's a larger room 1. So if you have a really big room 1, you don't want to just set 3 fixtures and just having a lot of space. You might have to shift the fixture forward because maybe room 3 is a little bit smaller, or maybe room 2. So it's just some examples to think about. Okay, my slide is, there we go. So how then you would easily identify that is through the mapping data worksheet that you'll see here. Have any of you seen this worksheet yet, or is this all new information? Nope, okay. So basically what this is, honestly, I would say if you could print this out, that would help you to really summarize everything I've talked about, because what it's going to do for you, it's going to really help you to understand what the fixture count is and the wall bay count is from the lab store to your store. So you will have the model quantities are already pre-printed on these documents when you pull them in Zipline. So the flower stands, we map to 2 flower stands in the lab store. So then you would write how many you have. In most cases, I don't know of any stores that have more than 2 flower stands. So maybe the garden, actually, let me see, maybe wardrobers is a better example. I know a lot of stores that have 12 wardrobers. but in the lab store, we map to 8. So that already you can say to yourself, okay, I have 4 additional wardrobers that I could actually utilize. Then you would say, how would I utilize them? Where would I place them? Because again, we want to follow the brand strategy and not just place a wardrober in any place of the store. So there is where you would really leverage your filters, which you're going to learn. Bree's going to take you through the filters a little later on this afternoon and what to think about. But that's a perfect example of knowing your fixture count versus what we map to. And the same thing here goes for wall bay count, and that's probably the majority of wardrobers and wall base is probably what I see most common, but not matching up to model quantity. And then the store attribute listing report is so great because it will tell you if you, especially if you're new to a store or if you're just new to the brand, it's so great to really understand the architecture and the attribute of your store. So again, the square footage, when the store open, it has all of like really great information about your specific store. The next thing we're going to talk about is adjacencies. So when we talk about adjacencies, you may think we talk about mostly around color, but there's a couple of things around adjacencies. So first, of course, it's color, but it's also about product. So you'll see sort of the rainbow at the bottom here where it sort of goes from warm to cool. So you probably notice how we merchandise our stores in Aerie. It's very color focused. We are pretty much all about color. So if you have architectural differences from the lab store and you need to make a change, you need to make color and adjacencies of product top of mind while you're mapping. And again, when we go through our mapping in action, you'll see all of this coming together. So it's going to be easy for you to sort of see what I'm talking about a little bit later on. But color stories, our stores are pretty much merchandised warm to cool or cool to warm. It's all depending on the seasonal message or the seasonal strategy, what we're going after, in what color order, and this sort of the collection as well. So what's important to keep in mind, as you see here on the photo, is that this whole side runs warm into cool. And then you'll see the table in the front here is all warm and the cool is in the back. So it's sort of adjacent. So the warm is adjacent. The warm product on the table is adjacent to the warm side of the wall. And then as you continue further back in the store, you see the cool is sort of adjacent back here to the cool side of the table. So when we talk about adjacencies, or if you hear the word adjacencies, we talk about these two things. It's product and color that we want to make sure that we keep in mind. A best practice too, because we are changing our colors pretty frequently from floor set to floor set, is that you can make an arrow too on your map, or you can indicate on your map on what flow of the colors are if you have a flip store, for instance. Okay. So when we sort of have talked through the color and product, then we are looking at if you need to, based on the layout of your store, if you need to flip your store, you might have a store that's built, the architecture built on the opposite sides of the lab store. So again, I'm just bringing you back to that fixture overview thumbnail page to keep that in mind, because that's when you can sort of, I get this question a lot, how do I know if my store is flipped or not? That's where you have to look at the thumbnail overview photo and say, okay, where does my 6 bays land in room 1 and where are my 4 bays land and the photo op wall. So I'll just sort of do an illustration here. So on the left-hand side here, which is the lab store, bays 7 through 10, which is 4 bays, lives on the left side. Or we build them out on the left side, I should say. And then 1 through 6, we build out on the right side. Then if we go over to the right, this is your store. So your store, 6 bays run on the left side, and your 4 bay and your photo op wall runs on the right side. So already here, I know that my store is flipped. That's what we call it. You have to flip the wall bay sides. So that's sort of what we indicated here, is that again, your 7 through 10 will go over on the right side. So when you are flipping, that's when you have to keep the color and product on top of mind. Because if you're flipping something, you now have to rework the order of the color to ensure that whatever color we're leading with closest to the door, it's flipped. And that also goes for the tables. So if it also sort of depends on where your entrance land in your store. If your entrance is way over here on the left-hand side, you're not going to want to put your center lead over to the right side behind the window. You're going to want to position your center lead based off where your entrance into the store is. So again, we call that flipping presentation. So when you're looking at here, it's basically what I just spoke to, but you'll see live photos, so sort of how the image trace in the map app landed. So you'll see that 7 through 10 landed over here, and it still leads with cool into warm. And how we got them to reflect is that we have a reflection tool in the map app that I will show you a little bit later when we go through the functions of the map app that you can click. So it sort of reflects the image to match the order of the base and color. So then you'll see here on the left-hand side, the 1 through 6, and it leads with cool into warm, and the same thing for the tables. So actually, I'm going to backtrack here. So when we're looking at walls and building out walls, whether you have additional wall base or if you have less wall base. So when you have additional wall base, we call that expand on wall base. So you have to expand the presentation out to fill all of your wall base. If you have less wall base, we call it contract. So you have to sort of, if we build to 4 wall bay in the document and you only have 3, or if you have split wall base, you now have to rework the base to make sure all of it fits. So there's 2 sort of reference and words that we use. So when you think about walls, just walls, not really tables, you think about balance and symmetry. So if you were to expand or contract, so balance is really the equal sort of weight on both sides of the center. So you'll see this bay here is repetitive to this bay. This bay is built same as this bay. So pretty much every other bay is built the same. So it's sort of just equally distributed across the 4 bays. It's not like these 3 bays are built every other, and then this is a completely different structure. This wall, the hardware structure is sort of mirroring and distributing evenly across the 4 bays. Then symmetry is sort of mirroring each side of the center. So you'll see here, this is sort of built the same way as this side of the center. So each side of the center is built the exact same way, and we call that symmetry. So balance and symmetry is really, really important when you guys are building out your wall base, and sort of that is how the structure of our wall base are built in our document. It's all about balance and symmetry. In terms of how do we think about balance in terms of fixture placement, it's pretty simple. It's just making sure that all of our fixtures really just fits comfortably in our space. So going back to when we talked about the guest navigation and making sure that our guests can comfortably walk through our store. So it's not in one room, it's super crowded, and then in another room, maybe it's less crowded, making sure it's an even, sort of even balance throughout the store with the fixtures, and obviously making sure all of the fixtures fit in each room, regardless of what the document is saying. Like I go back to the comment I made earlier about having a really big room 1, the document showed 3 tables, but if you can fit a 4th table because maybe room 2 or room 3 is smaller, then which table would we push forward? That's where you would sort of lean in on your filters and the documents. That sort of round out mapping tools and resources. So quite a few tools and resources, right? We talked about a lot of things to keep in mind. But I think once you sort of get into your store, look at all of this in your store, and you sit in front of the computer going through Zipline, and you sort of play around with everything and have it all laid out in front of you, it's going to sort of all come together. And over time, you will sort of get into a rhythm of all of this. And it's not like I sit and read through every single tool for every single floor set. Some of these tools, I just want to sort of nod to that it's just there if you need them. So they're a resource for you that you can leverage. We're not expecting you to read every single Zipline tool for every single floor set document, but again, it's a great information to know and sort of where to go if you have questions. So before we head into mapping the floor set, actually going through all the steps, sort of how to approach all of this with all the information we've gathered so far. What's on your mind? I'd love to hear from maybe 1 or 2 people. Even if it's just any learning so far or any comments. Could be small, could be big, anything? Lots, okay, sorry, the chat function disappeared. Courtney said, lots of new tools. Sorry, I missed it, it disappeared. Oh, it's not working. Oh, you guys are on mute. Some of you guys are on mute, that's why. There's a little button at the bottom that will, if you click on that, it will unmute you. I don't think I can do it. Yeah, I don't know if anyone tried to talk that's on mute, but there's a little button if you scroll down to the bottom of the screen with a microphone on it. If you click on that, it will unmute you. Okay, Lexi said good new details as a new STL. Perfect. I don't have time to read all of the chat functions because they're coming through so quickly, but okay, so some great learnings. If there are any questions, just kind of shout them out for me because I think my chat function just sort of disappears really quickly, so I don't have time to read them. But okay, so let's head into mapping the floor set. So now it's the exciting part of it. I love mapping. It is so fun. And just some fun facts, just probably about 2 years ago, we were doing arts and crafts. So every floor set, we would cut out the thumbnails, we would paste them onto blueprint paper and sort of walk through them over the phone. So now everything is digital, and we launched this truly amazing app that's called the Mapped app, and that's sort of where you do all your mapping. Have any of you, you can do the thumbs up or down, have any of you seen the Mapped app so far or worked with it yet? No? Okay. So I would highly recommend part of your training to carve out some time to open up the Mapped app on the iStore's iPad. There's also some really awesome modules on the AEO Academy. So the tools and resources for the Mapped app is on AEO Academy. That would sort of help you learn the app. It's super user-friendly, very easy. Once you've mapped once, you'll probably get hang of it right away. And there's also a leadership guide on the AEO Academy that you can go through and get familiar with. Okay, so let's head into mapping the floor set. So the first step is review the plan. And basically that's what we've done so far. So the past 45 minutes, we've been reviewing the plan. We've gone through all the documents. We've got grounded on all of the information. We truly understand. We're content experts. We know the documents. We know the floor set. We know the big ideas. We have identified all the rooms in the shop. So we've gone through the whole floor set document, and we know exactly what all the rooms, how all the rooms lay out in the store, what all the shops are. Now it's time to start mapping. So we're going to start with mapping all the walls first. So when you're in the Mapped app, you're going to literally start just plugging in your walls. So I want to share best practice here because this is typically what I share with everyone that sometimes can be a myth, and it's really important to have that floor set thumbnail page in front of you when you're sitting down with your Mapped app, because that way you'll see exactly how the floor set is intended to, or how it should be built out. And then when you're sitting on the other side and looking at the Mapped app, you want to make sure that you have leveraged all the right thumbnails and you've placed everything that's supposed to be placed. You can also filter the Mapped app to be to your format. So if you, or store design, I should say. So if you're market design, you can filter it. So only the thumbnails or the image trace in the Mapped app for market design will come up. So it's not confusing with classic and modern. And then lastly, it's mapping all the fixtures. So again, looking at the thumbnails, how many fixtures and what are the fixtures we are placing based on your store design, and then audit it to make sure that you place everything in your store. And then it's finalizing the map and submit for approval. So when we say submit, there's technically not a button that you hit submit. I know a lot of people think like I have to send it somewhere or submit it somewhere. It's all live. So we basically just have like an approval process in the bottom of the map where it says mapping, review, and approved. So it's pretty much a three-step process. So when you're in the mapping part of the phase, you leave it in the mapping. And then when you review it, if you're an MTL and you review it with your STL, you can move it to review. And then once the map has been approved by your DTL, and for some of you that have an MVL like myself, like Brie or Lakeisha or Sarah or Marcy, we are part of the mapping process with you. And once we approve the map, we move it to review, approved. So there is a little bit of a process. For all stores in this brand, we do review the maps with the DTL and the regional director. So we do have mapping calls where we review all of the store's maps. So, but for you in stores, for the MTL and the STL, super important that you two are aligned before before it goes to the DTL review. So this is basically, if you think about it as 5 steps. Okay, so a couple of more things in terms of when you're in the phase of mapping. So you're sitting down with your Mapped app, you're reviewing everything, and you're starting to plug in all of your walls and tables. there's a couple of supporting tools that we have for this too, in terms of if there is an architectural difference between your store and the lab store, and they're called mapping options. So basically what we do is that we provide a couple of global solves to architectural differences that can help you with some of the challenges you have in stores. We go over these mapping options in our MTL floor set calls that I talked about earlier, where we spend about an hour together walking through the floor set as a larger group, and we also go through mapping options in that call. So for example, small things could be like the flower stand. If we map the flower stand fit side by side in the floor set document, we know a lot of our stores cannot fit them side by side, so we can map them back to back. And that's what you see here, along with some supportive notes. So these are called mapping options. So we attach these mapping options to the kickoff with every seasonal floor set. So when you go through your first MTL call and get to listen to all of this information, you'll quickly sort of put it all into place. But just know that we are providing mapping options and mapping solves to global challenges, and maybe some of you can use this information while you're mapping. This just continues in that step one, review in the floor set direction. And it's sort of, I've talked about a couple of times already, but this is just a fixture overview of the market design and a fixture overview of the classic design, where you can see the differences are. So if you are a market design, you want to make sure that you are following or looking at the market design fixture overview. And then of course, if you're classic, you are following this fixture overview. These two fixture overviews both live in the market and classic floor set document. If you are a modern, design, you have a complete separate floor set document that you will follow. So you just see it's highlighted here at the bottom that you can see the differences. Okay, so as we're heading into the second step, when we talked about identify rooms and shops, there's a couple of things to keep in mind, because when we go into the mapping in action, you'll see some of these opportunities that we're going to identify. So we label everything in the mapped app, and this is sort of the breakdown on how we label everything. So we label everything with the seasonal shop. So you see these little flags right here around the perimeter of the map. Those are called seasonal shop labels. So depending on where the shops land in your store, traditional store that looks very similar to lab store, it's pretty much room 1, room 2, and room 3. Then we have our bra shop in the back of the store. Our clearance we have over here. Typically, when we have clearance our floor in a traditional store, we'll map 2 bays to clearance. We have fitting rooms, so you want to label where your fitting room and your stock room is, so we know that that is the entrance into those places. And then line management. So for safety and social distancing, we place a line management for the cashier rep area, as well as the fitting room area, and then in the front of the store. If we continue the conversation, we identify rooms and shops. I just want to flash a couple of architectural maps, sort of that's different from the lab store, and these are A3 Classic versus A3 Factory. I'm not sure if we have any factory stores on the call, but just making a nod to our A3 Factory stores you see highlighted in the back of the store. This is typically room 3 in a traditional store, and in the back of in room 3 in a factory store, we do merchandise all clearance. So what you will do here, I'm just going to sort of bring this all up because it's easier to see all in one page. So this is how different our stores can look like. So this obviously looks like a lot of information, but again, this is just a lot of different types of stores. So I just sort of want a high level walk through how it could look like based on your store. So a traditional store is pretty much set up, and these colors really just identify room 1, 2, and 3 basically. But a traditional store is merchandise room 1, room 2, and room 3. If you are an A3 small store, which I don't think most of you on this call is A3, but if you work in a smaller store or if you have an A3 assortment, it tends to be a smaller square footage. So a lot of our side-by-side stores are A3 small. So then the rooms have to sort of flex, right? Because it's a smaller space. So now you've got room 1 and room 2 in the front of the store on the left and the right side versus going from front to back, and then room 3 in the back. And then we've got factory store, again, room 2, room 2 shifted into room 1 on the left side, and room 1 shifted over to the right side, and then room 3, and then we have clearance in the back of the store. We are sort of in the same steps, the mapping walls. We've talked a lot about expanding and contracting. So when you're looking at this scenario specifically, it's a modern design example. So the back wall here in the lab store, we built to 4 slats. In your store, let's call it your store, we have 6 pallets. So now we have to expand to 6 pallets. So now how do we do that? So that's where you want to sort of work through that during your mapping process. And this is where you want to keep the visual merchandising filters top of mind to make sure that we are making the best decision in terms of expanding the presentation. And when I say visual merchandising filters, you'll get more information. You'll learn all about these filters later on today when Bree's taking you through that. But you'll see in this example that we have actually used generic images to indicate on how we're going to expand this presentation from 4 slats to 6 slats. So we have the capabilities of showing that in the Mapped app. Okay, so now by this time we have reviewed everything, we have all the information, we've mapped out all of our walls, we feel really good about that. Now we're going into step 3, which is mapping fixtures. So the order you sort of want to approach mapping fixtures is by starting in the front of your store, and you want to place your center lead first, which is this table right here that I'm circling on the page. That is our most important fixture. So we want to make sure that that table or that fixture is placed in the right place in room 1. So it's always based off of where the entrance of your store lands. So typically this table sits about 5 to 6 feet in from the lease line here. That's where you place your first table, and that sets your foundation for where you place everything else. And then once you've placed all of your tables, your bigger fixtures, you can then start working through. If you are a larger store and you have more space, and we go back to the scenario we talked about, maybe you have 12 or 10 wardrobers, but we only map to 8 in the lab store. If you have the inventory and if you have the space, I would say if you have the right inventory and the right space, 4 additional fixtures, that's when you start layering in all those extra fixtures that you may have. You may not have them, so that then you wouldn't have that to work through. But like, for instance, the store that I'm in today, it's a very large store and they have 4 additional wardrobers. So we work through in her mapping process of what is she going to place on these wardrobers? So what are some of the key items and where are they going to be placed? On the photo on the right-hand side, you see the finished map. So it's the same example actually that we saw in the beginning of our session today. It's a store with a very large room 1. So they actually flexed one of the round tables from room 2 into room 1 to get an additional footprint in here. And you see how a nice balance it is with the center lead and the 2 rounds and the flower stand. The other thing is we have a feature that we have in our Mapped app. We have spacers in different, set up by different sizes. So it's from 6 feet to 3 feet. So to keep social distance top of mind, we do ask that we place these spacers to making sure that we have the appropriate space between each fixture and from walls to fixtures. And that will give us a good indication if we have enough space, if we've given each room and fixture enough space. Okay, so now we are in step 4, which is finalizing the map. So we mapped the walls, we mapped the tables, we feel really good about everything we placed. So now it's time to really just check in to make sure, to triple check, I always say, that you've placed all of your labels, you've placed your spacers, you feel really good about everything that you have mapped out, there's a solid plan. What we haven't covered yet either is the chat function, and that's why it's so important that you go back in to AEO Academy and look at some of those modules, because there's a lot more information to the Mapped app and more functions than what we cover today. But basically we have a chat function here that you can actually comment and write out sort of your plan for anything that you want to alert. So what's cool about this is you can see here, you can go back and forth having a conversation and a dialogue around the same fixture. So if you click on a fixture or highlight the fixture, go in and make a comment, it's all live. So it's like pretty much like a text on your phone. I can see it, your DTL, your STL, anyone can see it that has the Mapped app, and we can read all of your comments in here. So it's very smooth and it's super user-friendly. So yeah, that is pretty much finalizing the map. So you actually see here too in the image in review, I had talked earlier about the different phases. So this map is currently in review before it moves to approved. So make any adjustment based on the STL and DTL feedback. So once we've all had our mapping call, and if there's any feedback, we want to be sure that we go back into the Mapped app and update any feedback we've gotten. So that sort of closes out mapping the floor sets and the 5 steps on how to approach mapping. So again, I'll pause here for a second to kind of check in with you guys and see if you have anything before we go into mapping in action, which is sort of an exercise I'd like for us to do together, but love to get some great participation. So what's on your mind so far?
Like that it's interactive on the iPad, so that you can kind of add comments to what you plan if you can't execute it the way that it's written on there. And there's just open communication, so everything going into the floor set is kind of accounted for.
Awesome. I know, it's just so great. It's such a game changer. It's such a big win to be able to just sort of go back and forth. Yeah, it's very smooth. Anything else?
I just have a quick question. Ideally, how long should mapping take? I know if it's your first one, it could take a little bit longer, but this seems like a fairly easier process with the technology. Would you say it takes like 45 minutes to map?
I love that question. That's a really, really good question. Yeah, I've been with the brand for a long, long, long time. And when we did our arts and crafts, it could take us hours. And what this Mapped app have done for the process and given us time back, I mean, if you are a pretty straightforward traditional store, very similar to the lab store, and then you've done all of sort of your homework by pulling all the information, truly understand, mapping can take 15 minutes. But what I would say is what's the key to a successful map, and it's not just like getting all of the functions inputted, like checking the boxes. It's truly understanding the content. So I like to call it content expert. So really understanding all of that before you go into the mapping, and that's what's taking a little bit longer. That can take a couple of hours for you to sit down, have everything pulled, but you can also do it in phases. So like the kickoff and the NPL and all of those tools and resources that we get 2-3 weeks out before mapping, if you pull all of those and read through and make sure that you feel really good about all of that information, then it's just like when the floor set document post, which is the Sunday before you go in to build the floor set. So that's, if you work that Sunday, Monday, you'll pull all of the floor set document, the window document, you read through everything, you sit down, and then have all these tools in front of you with your Mapped app. The actual process of creating the map can take 15 minutes. Very, very
Got
fast.
it. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I do want to emphasize on that though, because, and I have this conversation a lot with teams, is that it's that whole planning phase before you go into building the map, if you will. That takes a little bit longer because we do have a lot of information to go through. So, great question. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to head into mapping in action, and that's sort of our last part of the training. So we're going to pretty much take all of the things that we've sort of talked about over the past 60 minutes and put it into practice. So I'd love your participation here. Nothing is right or wrong, and anything that you notice you can call out. But the first thing we're going to do together is sort of like just look at this map that I have up on the screen. And based on everything we talked about, from spacing and color and adjacencies and balance of the fixtures and expanding wall base, all of these things that we talked about, what are some of the things that you are seeing on this map that is or could be an opportunity that you would want it to cross-reference or follow up on? Anything you see as an opportunity on this map in terms of walls? Oh, someone said something in a chat function. I don't know why the chat function goes away very fast for me. Empty walls. Okay. Yes, absolutely. So what we did here is that we left all of these walls empty. So we didn't map anything here. So that would lead me, so if I were an STL, or if we go to our DTL and review this map, we'd be like, wondering what we're going to do with all of these bays, but they're not mapped out. And what we don't want to do is wait until the actual floor set build and try to figure this out, because that will take a lot of time. So you remember in the beginning when we talked about our objectives, it will eliminate, by having a solid plan, it will eliminate a lot of, one, wasted time and also double work. So good call. Anything else? What about the fixtures? What do you see on the fixtures that sort of stands out to you? So these little circles here, these are our spacers. So you'll see it's a very tight squeeze here. So we talked earlier about how you can set the flower stands back to back versus side by side as a solution here to open up the sight line and open up the space into back half of the store. It also feels a little crowded over here between the market table and the rectangular table. We have a wardrober by itself right here. So wardrobers typically live adjacent off of a table or to live as a vignette, as a pair. So that's one thing that we're noticing. We also notice here, right, at the color. So this store is flipped. So we didn't flip the color. So here we're leading with warm to cool, where it should be leading cool to warm. So what we're going to do is, I just want to highlight what we just talked about. So here's exactly what I just talked about of the fixtures. These are 3 fixtures that sort of stands out on the page, like, oh, the spacing doesn't feel right here. The shop labels too. The labels weren't placed throughout the store, so we only have 2 shop labels placed. The wall base, as someone had just mentioned, we hadn't planned for all of our expanded wall base. So basically what you're seeing here is the correction to the map. So after our feedback, so this is the before map that we just talked through, and this is the after map. So here's, we corrected everything that we had noticed was an opportunity. So you'll see the flower stands, we adjusted those to sit back to back versus side by side. We adjusted the single wardrober here. We moved it over to be paired back with a rectangular table. We shifted over the rectangular table more to the side. This store probably could be a side-by-side offline or an AE and Aerie, so it's shifted over. And then we fixed all of the labels. We added all the labels, the correct labels. And then we also used text boxes to identify our bras where they all landed from left to right side. Yeah, and no lease lines. So there's no line management for the fitting rooms, as well as in the front of the store. We're not showing the sanitation center either, actually. So that's sort of how you can look at it, and hopefully that was a good learning. So you could see what some of the opportunities were and some of the corrections we made. So anything else you'd like to mention on these maps? Okay, so the sort of closing page is just walking through some of the features of our Mapped app, which I'm really excited about because they helped so much during the process of the mapping. So like I had mentioned earlier, we have spacers. And the way you can do, if you click this little circle right here that you see on the screen, if you place all the spacers and you click on this, they will remove all the spacers. You can actually see because it tends to, if you use a lot of spacers, it tends to look very crowded on the page. So you can remove the spacers by turning this on and off. For filters, I had made a nod to this earlier, that you can filter through the different store designs, because if you don't do that, you will have all of these different options in your image tray. These are called image trays, so you will have all of those lined up by room, and it could be quite a few of them that you have to sort of filter through to find your store design. So whatever store design you are, you just click on that. It will bring up those fixtures only. The reflection tool we had talked about also. It's really cool and it's really beneficial when you, again, flipping your store and you have to flip the color. So what you'll do, you just highlight the base and then you click on the reflection tool and that will mirror the image. And then we have the shop labels. So the shop labels, as you're placing all of your wall base, I would place all of the shop labels simultaneously. So it indicates exactly where your shops are going. And then the duplication is really great because you can duplicate the map. So if there is a current map, well, your current map in the store, I should say, that you have now, you could go in and duplicate that map if you wanted to practice. And that way it still allows you to keep the original map without doing any edits. It will stay how you have original map, and you can just duplicate it and then you can practice. Also could be a good option sometimes if you have a store that's very unique and you maybe have two thoughts on how you would want to map the store. You could create two maps, option one, option two. Probably doesn't happen very often, but it's an option. So again, for any reason you wanted to duplicate your map, you could do that. You can also duplicate it, let's say, if you're going from holiday 1 to holiday 2, and the floor sets are pretty similar, instead of starting over from scratch and delete everything and start everything over, you can also duplicate it that way. Yeah, this pro tip here is just indicates that you can go into Zipline to reference the guide. I think I may have mentioned that the guide live in AEO Academy, but it does live in Zipline. The modules are in AEO Academy, so I just want to make a correction to that. So the modules are in AEO Academy. That's where you really can do the courses. And then the reference guide lives in Zipline. And that is pretty much wraps everything up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to hear from you of what you've learned today or any takeaways that you'd like to share.
It's just good to know, being from a different retail background, and how we executed floor sets there versus how we do it here, and the planning that goes behind it, easily translatable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Cassandra said, did not know I could have two maps at the same time. Yep. You can have three too, but that might be a little confusing, but yeah, you can duplicate many times. What else? Do you feel like this sort of how we walked through everything helped to lay the foundation on how you should approach mapping? Do you feel like the tools and the resources, are they easy to sort of, it's been very helpful seeing a different resource. This is all new to me, so it's been very informative. Because I know sometimes when we sit through the PowerPoint and go through obviously a lot of information, but I think if you can keep in mind that it's pretty much broken down to the tools and the resources too. So I think that probably the next step for you is that you'll go back and you go through all of these tools and resources. You go through the Mapped app to make sure you feel really good about the functions and the features and how to sort of use the Mapped app. And then really then from there, you can go in, because we are building Holiday 3 in the beginning of December. So we got a little bit of time before we head into the next floor set. So we had our first MTL. We have our first MTL floor set call the week after Green Friday that you'll be sitting through. This information is not in, I think someone said in a Mapped app, it's information's in Zipline. I have recorded the call. So anyone that wants to listen to it, we will be sending out the recording. I believe it might be actually be living in Zipline. I'll find out where it goes, but we have recorded all the calls. All right, anything else? All right, well then you will be getting 10 minutes back to your day. And thank you so much for spending this past 90 minutes talking about mapping. Best of luck. If you have any questions or anything that comes up in the next few weeks, reach out to your DTL, your STL, or if you have an MVL. Bye, everyone.